Hello, and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, a podcast by, for, and about people who have found a secular path to sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is John S., and with me today is my co-host, Angela B. Angela, how you doing?
I'm good. That's how people should greet me every time.
Yeah.
I think I need to get a copy of that to put on my phone. So,
A little side story about that, by the way. When I was like within my first year of sobriety, I was going to this group as an all men's group, and I was kind of quiet and not really one to smile a whole lot, and I was just kind of withdrawn. And so, for whatever reason, anytime I would walk in a room, they started giving me a standing ovation, and it was like really, really weird because after a while, I started to expect it, because this went on for like a really long time. So yeah,
nice.
it was crazy. So we have an interesting guest today. His name is Steve K. He's a renowned blogger and writer in the recovery community. His book, The 12-Step Philosophy of Alcoholics Anonymous, an interpretation by Steve K., is a helpful guide for anyone in recovery from addiction. His interest in Stoic philosophy makes his book unique in that respect, and it's an interesting reading experience. I would recommend the book. A lot of it you can read on his blog, 12stepphilosophy.org, I believe. So I thought of Steve as our first guest because his personal story is so compelling and inspiring. And I thought that you would be interested in hearing from him and learning how he went from a young man just out of prison to the sober, thoughtful, and talented person he is today. And hopefully we'll be able to hear him and speak with him if he is live with us now. Steve, are you there?
Can you hear me, John?
He's there. I hear you. How are you?
Yeah, I've been struggling with this, getting the sound to come through. But
well,
anyway,
you're coming in just fine now, and I'm so glad that you are. Oops, he's gone now.
Oh dear.
So this will be interesting. This is what will happen sometimes when you're dealing with technology. So anyway, so Steve will hopefully make it back on here, and we'll be able to go through a little bit of his story and find out what he has learned in his time in recovery. But in the meantime, let's. There he's back again. There you are. Hi, Steve. Joe's out there. Hi, Joe.
Yeah.
So we'll wait for him to connect.
Yeah.
We'll wait for him to connect. So anyway, Angela and I were talking a little bit before Steve got here that some of the things that they have in common is an interest in trauma and how that influences addiction in one's life later on. And Angela, you mentioned something that the Center for Disease Control here in the United States actually has the ACE information on their website.
Yeah. If you just Google ACEs, I think it's the first thing that comes up. I'm not positive. I was looking for it this morning because I was talking about the documentary Resilience, which talks about ACEs and some of the ways that it's been the information they have got from that has been used to create some programs for schools in different areas that are helping teachers and legislators become trauma informed. And so looking that up, I found that the CDC here in the US had ACEs on there and a lot of information about it, and then linking to the actual ACE study that was done.
Yeah. Steve, I think you might be connected now. Are you there?
Hello?
There he is. He's back. How about that?
Yeah, I'm struggling with this. But,
now, you might not have heard the nice things that I said about you, which is okay, I suppose.
you can repeat them.
I can repeat them. Yeah. I just said that you're a very interesting person. I think I wanted you to be our first guest on this live stream for a couple of reasons. First of all, we put this thing together for people in Europe who are asking for a live stream at a time that they can actually be awake and present for. And also, you just have such an interesting story. And I was reading your blog post on your anniversary, your 15th anniversary. And it just reminded me just how interesting your story is, and how you went from really being a young man just out of prison to just this incredible, talented, educated person that you are today. And I thought that, who better to have on our first live stream for Saturday than you?
Thanks a lot, yeah. Yeah, no, that's good of you. Yeah, no, I suppose then it's been a long road as well, really. That I suppose getting educated, and and it's only really recently that I started writing. It was only several years ago, really, when I started my blog. Was it 2015, just before Beyond Belief started.
And what's interesting, if I understand your story, is like, you were a young man, you were in your 20s when you were first thinking or trying to get help with your drinking, and you really didn't have much of an education at that time. You dropped out of school.
Yeah, I left school and no qualifications. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got in trouble.
Yeah, I played through it, really. I was a sort of a delinquent teenager. I didn't really go to school for the last couple of years, and left school at 16 without taking any. I got a job with a builder. I used to labour for a builder. So, and I was really heavily drinking then at 16.
Yeah. And then you got in trouble, I guess, and ended up going to prison for 12 months.
I went to prison a couple of times, yeah. For 18 months, once or 12 months, yeah. And that was after, a long string. I've been getting in trouble with the police since I was 15.
Yeah.
Through 25. So it was 10 years, really. I was constantly in trouble with the police, and nearly every day I ended up getting sent to prison a couple of times as, the offences got more serious. And then really it was when I left, when I got out of prison last time, I was determined not to start drinking again, and I did the first day I was released from prison.
And you did?
Yeah. So, and then I struggled for another 6 months, and drinking was getting progressively worse again. And, I could see I was going straight back to jail, really. And that's when I reached out to AA. I just looked AA up, and I came across AA in the phone book, and just went to a local meeting the same night while I was still sort of, withdrawing, really, from drink from the weekend. And I always used to sort of share the meetings, really, that if he hadn't felt so bad, sort of was still sort of shaking and shivering and shaking sort of thing. I was that desperate then, all right, I'll go to this meeting, but I think if it had sobered up for a few days, I probably wouldn't have gone, I don't know. But yeah, and I've been going to meetings ever since. And that was, I was 25 at the time, and 55 now. So
it's interesting. You wrote in your story that when you stopped drinking, you realized that you liked learning. And that you realized you were intelligent, and that you wanted to learn.
Yeah, well, I started education classes while I was in prison near the end of my last sentence. I realised and was getting sort of praise from the tutor, the class tutor, really. And, I realised that he had a capacity for understanding and learning and reading. And I started reading. I think I read my first book cover to cover when I was when I was 25. That was the first time I'd read a proper book, and say I got released from prison, and the following week I got on an access to higher education course. And then went to university from there.
What was the first book you read?
I'm not quite sure. I can't remember. I don't think. It was it was a Michael Palin book. It was he does those travelogues, doesn't he? I don't know if you know Michael Palin over here, but he does these documentary sort of travelogues, and it was, I don't know, it was Around the World in 80 Days or something like that. It was one of the books. It was about him traveling all around the world. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then but I probably read some other books after that, but I can't remember what they were now.
There we go. I had to make sure that I was recording. One nice thing when we do a live stream is that YouTube records anyway. So, because I forgot to press the record button, and that, would you believe that's actually a fairly common mistake for people who do podcasts, is they sometimes forget to press record. But that's what makes a live stream so nice. So anyway, so I thought that was pretty compelling how you went from that to where you are now. I could identify with a lot of your story. When I was in my 20s, my life was pretty, I don't know, it was topsy-turvy, I guess you might say. I had my run-ins with the law, never had to do any time in jail other than an overnight stay. But Yeah. So yeah, I can certainly relate with that. But so you now are in recovery, and why don't we talk about what your recovery is like and how you got to where you are today, Steve?
Well, I feel secure in my recovery now in terms of not drinking or misusing, any drugs or anything like that. I feel really secure, and I think that as I've got older and that's just increased really. So I feel pretty rock solid where that's concerned. But my interest really is, I listened to the podcast that you did last night, and yeah, you were talking about emotional sobriety, and I don't know if they recorded that webinar.
I did.
Right, I'd like to listen to that because they have some great speakers on it. But and I've read one of Alan Burge's books. So yeah, I've got it in front of me actually. It's a really good book. But yeah, no, that's what I'm interested in. Long-term recovery is all about emotional sobriety for me, and I'm really interested in the psychosocial sort of causal factors of addiction. If you can pick up, if you only have to read my blog, and you get that really from reading that. So because you can't really do much about any sort of biological sort of predisposition that you might have, but you can sort of do something, about those, psychosocial sort of influences. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in. Sort of work that I've just agreed to take some work on, or I'll co-facilitate a men's therapy group really, and that's really looking at that side of things. It's looking at the developmental trauma and also societal and sort of cultural stress, chronic stresses that are placed when it's a men's group, so placed on men, so which lead to all sorts of problems, but addiction being one of them. So that's what I'm doing next. Actually, it starts on the 10th of October. That group does. So I've just agreed to do that. I'm looking forward.
Very cool. Something that's definitely needed.
Yeah, there's not many. Around here, there's no men's AA groups. There's a women's AA group. There's no men's AA group, and I think women are much better at supporting each other and networking than men are. So when I got asked to sort of run some sort of group, it's for a local organisation, a community interest company that I'm involved with, that a group of therapists run. And they were wanting me to start a group there, run a group there, or facilitate a group. And what came to mind really was a men's group because of the sort of lack of provision that way. So it'd be good for me as well, that I'm going to participate in this group as well, because I'm the sort of issues that I came to AA with really are sort of still there. I might have sort of not as pressing, and I don't act out on them the same, but yeah, they're still all there, I think, and some of them need work, so I'll be taking part in that myself.
Steve, I went to a men's group for the first 25 years that I was in AA, and it was really by accident. My first group, the first meeting I went to was a mixed group, and somebody recommended this men's group for me, and I thought it was kind of strange. Why would you want me to go to an all men's group? But I'm glad that I went there because there were a lot of guys my age who we just had so much in common, and we were all in our 20s and 30s, and it was just great to have that community of people. And it was the first time really in my life that I had ever talked to other guys about how I felt, what I was afraid of, those types of things, because men just don't normally open up with each other like that, and now I've kind of taken that for granted.
Yeah, so that's exactly it really. I think sort of intimacy in relationships is something that I struggle with, so it'd be a real opportunity to explore that topic, really, relationship difficulties. And they're not really, I suppose in your general, traditional meetings, a lot of them are focused on, sort of round here on sort of helping the newcomer step one. And it's not really, that appropriate really to talk about some of the things that I want to talk about. So, I was really like what Angela said as well. last night about, I suppose for me, how I interpret it is about the sort of intellectual sort of stagnation of traditional meetings, you know, in terms of it's the big book and it's the same old, you know, and it's limited, you know, very limited. And I'm, you know, very interested in exploring, you know, a lot more than that's in the big book, you know. And yeah, I think secular groups, AA groups, are a lot more intellectually stimulating. I think you do that in secular groups, from what you know, I've picked up anyway.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody about that. I think on Thursday, when my home group is Tuesdays and Thursdays, about and it was somebody who attends our group from another state and attends local groups. I think he's fairly early in sobriety, within, you know, I think he got sober in like March or something, but was talking about the differences that he notices in between the meetings that he attends there and the secular meeting, and that they're sometimes in traditional meetings, it seems that you're supposed to practice a form of humility, which is denying, you know, that you have anything to do with your sobriety. So oftentimes, you know, on sobriety anniversaries and stuff, people will say, well, I didn't do it, God did it. And, you know, and things along those lines, or, you know, well, I don't know, but, you know, and then you share what your experience is. And at our meetings, a lot of the times, you know, not always, we have more practical things to say because we're not attributing it to something else. It's like, this is what came up for me when somebody else shared, and this is my experience on that. And so it you know, it does feel like we're exploring a lot more issues other than just what is said in a lot of the traditional meetings, because our experience in a secular meeting is a lot of us have continued with therapy. A lot of us continue to learn and increase our, you know, education level. We explore things like trauma. We explore meditation and different forms of spiritual growth, if that's what the person is into. And so I really enjoy that. But I'm so glad to hear that you're going to be doing that with the men's group. I myself have never attended a men's group, so but I think it's going to be powerful, particularly because you do have an interest in toxic stress and in early adverse childhood experiences, and so particularly for the men that are in facilities. I think that's going to be really interesting information and might be able to help them in a way that that AA may not. So combining them is going to be, I can't wait to hear your experience with it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm doing it with a guy who's got a lot of experience as well. He's a, you know, really experienced therapist, and he's I suppose I'm coming more from the developmental trauma side of things, and he's very sort of clued up in terms of the societal and cultural stresses that are placed on men. So together, hopefully, it should be we should complement each other really, and it sort of have that holistic approach that I suppose similar to, you know, Gabamati, if you've looked at it. Any of his work, he takes that approach, you know, the sort of very much, you know, including the, you know, developmental experiences with sort of cultural, you know, and social sort of influences. And I mean, he's sort of highlights a lot of the toxic sort of stress, you know, that sort of capitalism generates, doesn't he? Really, I've been listening to some of his views that way recently, how it creates addiction, you know.
Right. Yeah. One thing that that I thought of too when you were speaking was women's groups. That yeah, I think that society or culture, you know, views women as being more social and being able to have groups. But I think it's also that, you know, that as AA developed, you know, they prefer women to be in their own group so that we didn't, you know, tempt men and create problems. So and that I've also found that there's a, you know, a section of women that come in that don't like women. that
Oh.
they view them as competition, or while they were drinking, that was part of their, their mindset, was that other women were competition. And so some of them stayed away from women's groups because they didn't want any women friends. And so as they moved into sobriety and got sometimes, some of them started going to some women's groups and developing friendship skills and the trust in other women as being, helpful to, sobriety and a resource for them. So I found that interesting because I've always had friends of all genders, and but it's a common experience that I've heard over and over again.
Yeah, I've heard it as well, and I've sponsored a woman I have, and she would always gravitate towards men, but I know in ongoing recovery she's developed more relationships with women. She started to do that. She's had the opportunity to do it. But so yeah, some women like that, and some women are intimidated by men as well. So I do sort of understand the need for women-only groups.
Yeah.
I've run other groups and facilitated other groups outside of AA, sort of in the treatment arena. And for a while, I was facilitating an all female group, and it was really interesting to watch how the women bonded, how some of the quiet ones really opened up, and then when after a few months, some men were introduced and it became a mixed group again, and they just changed. A lot of some of the women sort of got a lot quieter, and they were really affected by the men coming into the group. So I learned from that. I could really see, because I didn't really used to understand why women want a separate group, but that really sort of helped me understand that.
I'll tell you, the experience that I had in AA is kind of weird because, okay, I swear to God, for 25 years, I mostly went to this men's group. Rarely did I go to an AA meeting where there were women present. So I wasn't really getting a female perspective on recovery at all. And when we started our group, our We Agnostics group in Kansas City, and it was a mixed group, it was almost a relief for me to hear from a woman, and to hear their experience from their perspective. It was a whole new thing for me. And I felt like, to a certain extent, it's like I kind of cheated myself all those years by not exposing myself to a wider viewpoint, and so it's just, something I learned from, I guess. But I can't really knock too much about what I did, because it kept me sober for 25 years, for goodness sakes. But yeah.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like what a lot of people are experiencing, finding secular meetings and stuff right now, and secular information about recovery that they're like, well, the majority that I'm finding are people who've had sober time, and then finding our stuff through online resources during the pandemic, and are like, wow, I can't believe this was here. I wish I would have found it 10 years ago, or whatever else. And it's renewed their sobriety and created a much more interest in it. And now they feel more alive and interested in continuing to learn and grow.
It's really liberating when you think about it. I mean, I was that way. I mean, I had this one view of my recovery in my life, and I was just walking. They say it's a wide highway, but it was really kind of a narrow path where, it was that big book, and it was my group and the steps and all this kind of stuff, and always this need for a higher power. But when I really became liberated from that when I kind of accepted that I was an atheist and started thinking a little bit more critically and thinking for myself a little bit more. But it was only from knowing that I could do that by hearing other people online that I learned about the secular way of viewing AA. Totally changed my outlook, made me more excited about AA, actually, is what it did, and recovery, and my recovery. I think I've learned more in the last 5 years than I did all the time before that.
Was it through Agnostica, John, that you, I suppose, were?
That was one source. It was Agnostica, and it was Josie's podcast, Rebellion Dogs Radio. I would listen to that quite a bit. and AA Agnostica too. But the one thing that I did, the main thing that I did is I was searching for like groups for atheists in AA, and I found a little Google group, a Google Hangout, and it was just me, a guy from Minnesota who started it, and a young woman from Omaha. And we all became really good friends. And I particularly became really good friends with the young lady from Omaha. And she was like the first person I really became good friends with who had this alternative view of AA, that you could do it in a secular way. And she was really passionate about it. And we were both kind of excited. We were almost like revolutionaries. We wanted to change AA. And we would just, and I'd go up to Omaha and visit with her, and we would just sit in a coffee shop and talk about how we needed to rewrite the big book. We needed to create a wiki instead, so that people could put all their, we were do all this stuff. Anyway, she was a lot of fun, but she ended up growing out of AA. And yeah, she just decided that it wasn't for her, and she's doing great today. But yeah, that's kind of, it was that little group. And then, by the way, Steve, when I was in that little Google Hangout with her and this guy from Minnesota, a woman by the name of Dorothy H. joined us, and she's from Los Angeles, California. And she told me about that conference they were having in Santa Monica. That's how I learned about that. And then me and my friend from Omaha went to it together. Interesting.
Nice.
Che Shelton. Yes, Joe, I was a revolutionary. So anyway, by the way, if you would like to call, I know it's not a lot of people out there watching right now, but if you'd like to call us, you can. It's at 844-899-8278. We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to do that. Steve, you read an interesting book, or it sounds interesting. I want to check it out. You wrote about it in your piece on your anniversary. I wonder if you might talk about it a little bit. It was Redeemable by Erwin James.
Yeah, it's his memoir, really, his autobiography. But it's a great book, and it explores his childhood, and the effect that had on him, and so how he ended up in prison, really. But it's very, it's grim. His upbringing was extreme, the sort of neglect and abuse that went on. But his dad was alcoholic, and but yeah, no, he was just really really neglected, and it's no wonder he turned out as he did, really. But it was just that, like I say, it was at the 15-year anniversary for me that I've been sort of alcohol-free, and I thought, I just finished reading that book, and I identified with aspects of his experience, particularly emotionally, in terms of his emotional insecurity, his problems with anger, his problems with alcohol, and where that led him, really. And he started getting in trouble about the same time as me, and things came to a head for him when he was in his mid-20s, and he ended up involved in 2 murders. No, I didn't do anything nowhere near that serious, but the same as me, really. I was sort of ended up in jail a couple of times around that age. But then, he went to prison, for those murders. And really, the rest of the book is about his rehabilitation and redemption, in my opinion. I think, it's a really, brilliant example as well of the impact a good therapist, can have on someone, in sort of helping him turn the life around, that and education. So the therapist really encouraged him with education, so she could see that in him. And he sort of decided to live a life in prison, really, a productive sort of decent life in jail, which is not an easy environment. The sort of prisons he was in, which were sort of really high security prisons, are not easy to sort of exist in, really, and the way that he did. So yeah, I just thought it was a really inspiring story, and like I say, there was a lot of similarities, in these sort of I don't know, say emotionally and stuff that happened to him. Just because he's a bit older than me, but not much. So the time frame was very similar. So yeah, I just thought I could try and do something with that. It's a bit of a really. I sort of used it as to plug his book a bit, you know, sort of. I should actually send him a link to, you know, try and get in touch with him and send him a link to that article.
Yeah.
I've plugged your book, and what do you think of this article? You know,
Yeah.
because I think you know, I think it's a good article. I think it sort of really does promote his story in a positive light, you know. So yeah, and let's say I just thought there were some comparisons. There was a lot of differences, but there's some comparisons as well. But again, the value of education, the value of therapy, and certain people helping you, seeing, you know, potential within you and encouraging that. And I've come across, you know, certain people in my life that have done the same, because like him, you know, I really have had a lifelong struggle with emotional insecurity and low self-esteem. And you know, I get anxious because of it, don't think I can do things, you know. And so, I mean, listening to your introduction at the beginning saying, you know, miseducated or whatever, I'm thinking, no, I'm just some, you know, I don't know, working class lad, you know, sort of thing that say, you know, I don't sort of see that in myself, really. I don't see myself as intelligent or anything like that. You know, I'm reasonably intelligent, you know, but I don't see myself as anything special, sort of thing. So, you know, it's good when other people see quality, you know, qualities in you and sort of are willing to support that and sort of help you, you know. I've needed that in my life, and he found it in his. You know, certain people helped him. So yeah, he was just identifying on that level, a bit like we do in meetings. You know, I really identified with, even though there was, say, the extremes that he went to were a lot more than, you know, a lot more extreme than me, but you know, there were a lot of similarities. So. Yeah.
I think recovery memoirs are really powerful. I like reading them, and I might check this one out.
Yeah. And like you said in meetings, when we share our stories, you know, that's pretty much our superpower. And I know that some of the stories that I've heard in the rooms that are extreme, you know, like his story, give me good perspective when I am struggling emotionally with things, or, you know, thinking that my recovery is lacking in some way, or, you know, I'm just unhappy because I lost my car keys, and so everything in the world is horrible. And you know, there are little things that I've heard in the rooms that will pop up that will remind me that, you know, that I'm fortunate in a lot of ways. Not that I need to downplay what I have been through, but that for me, the truth is that it could have been a lot worse. You know, I never did go to prison, but I have a large amount of family members who did, and so it wasn't out of the realm of possibilities for me had I continued on the path that I was on. So I get a lot out of, you know, reading books, memoirs, and hearing stories from other people who've gone through things that I can empathize with, but that, you know, that I just find so amazing in their recovery, because, you know, I haven't had to face that. I haven't lost a child in recovery. I haven't been the cause of a child dying in recovery, whereas, you know, I know several people in the fellowship who have. And so it's, you know, good for me to have perspective on that, particularly as I'm working with emotions, and we know that those can go to extremes, like, you know, thinking the world is horrible because I lost my car keys, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, John.
No, I was just gonna say, Angela kind of reminded me of one of your YouTube videos that I was watching about. You were actually reading some of the 12 and 12 about how we take our emotions to extremes and so forth, and they kind of, you know, the language in the 12 and 12 sometimes isn't something I can relate to, but you know, in relation to what we were talking about with emotional sobriety, I can see some strong points that he was making there, and how you can kind of connect that to emotional sobriety, maybe.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I think it combines with, well, I think I mentioned it last night, when you're going through the steps in the fourth step, and you start to learn all of these coping mechanisms that haven't been helpful for you in your adult life that you developed as a child, that's kind of part of it, or at least for me, it felt like part of what started me on understanding how my feelings and emotions related to, my addictive behaviors or thinking. And so, that's for me, what I go back to oftentimes when I think of how does this relate within AA. Well, I started to learn about, these behaviors and my reactions really when doing the resentment inventory. And my sponsor looked at, the different resentments I had with me and helped me understand, where my reactions were, way off course, and that usually I reacted, much more severely to, something that somebody did than an average person would. And so that gave me the perspective that, I needed to learn more about that. And sometime later, now I'm understanding that as self-regulation and emotional self-regulation and learning the neurobiology of, why that happens. And it's been a really interesting trip. The other part of the emotional sobriety that brings up for me is that on my own, when I was single, I did a lot of work, in this area, and it wasn't until I got in relationship that I started to have to do so much more work. I didn't realize that being in relationship, romantic relationship, after a couple of years, triggers all of the attachment issues, from my childhood. And so I have to do a lot of the work that I did in early recovery again. But because I was getting different triggers from being in this relationship, there was more to it. And so it's kind of the peeling of the onion, I guess, that is often used as a metaphor in AA. And I agree with, what I heard from the webinar last weekend, that emotional sobriety is definitely the next layer of the onion, and perhaps, all of the other layers as well.
Yeah. Bill was talking in his letter, he was talking about how he realized that his problem had been an unhealthy reliance on people, places, and things, and having unrealized or unreasonable expectations, I suppose. And that was always causing him, I guess, that just furthered his angst and his depression, I think, is what he was writing about in that letter. But
Yeah.
I didn't get to hear too much of the presentation because I was focusing so much on the technical stuff that I was doing. But they're going to be posting that here pretty soon. It was recorded for posterity, so
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it was about that letter was about letting go of his, demands and dependencies, weren't it? Really, because he quotes that St. Francis prayer in that letter, doesn't he? About
he does.
Can't really fully live that prayer until I let go of these demands, and I don't know what he but his demands and dependencies.
These unhealthy dependencies, yeah.
That's it.
And he included AA in that list. And
He
so
did.
that's one of the things that I really, like about that, and because I do see that. In the beginning, I had that, and I think a lot of people do, where, I just changed my dependency to AA. So I was going to 3 meetings a day, things like that, all over town. And I did that for several years. And then, I started reaching out to other means of learning about myself and therapies and stuff like that. But there are people that I see in recovery who don't actually take that next leap, either into further recovery or into developing different social relationships. They just stay within, that small, realm of AA. And so yeah, I was grateful for learning about the letter and the discussion, and I'm hoping to take it to, some of the more traditional meetings I go to, for discussion, so that, people can hear, because sometimes they need to hear from the founders. Sometimes they just will not hear any other sort of ideas or possibilities or things that other people have written. But if you can bring to them something that was written, from the founders, then they'll open up to it some. And so I think it's great to have this now as a resource for that.
Angela, you reminded me of a book that I read. And when you said that Bill mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous as one of his unhealthy dependencies or something, I read a book. It was called, I think, Bill W. and Mr. Wilson. And the whole book, the book, it's not a very long book, but it was all about how Bill Wilson had this struggle with Bill W. He had this like dual personality, and how he kind of created this myth. So he had to live with this myth of Bill W. And so he had a really hard time with AA to a certain extent. He almost felt like he couldn't be an AA member, because when he would go to AA, he was just flocked and surrounded by people and so forth. And I don't know, it was kind of interesting when you think about it, because he kind of, in a way, furthered the myth, by the way that he liked to tell stories, but he was also kind of troubled by it at the same time. It's kind of a fascinating book, really.
Yeah, separate sense of self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people do knock him because he did have a lot of faults, and he did some things that were not good. I mean, he did some bad things, for sure. But he is an interesting study of a human being, I think. Anyway,
I always think with Bill Wilson, he was a real human being, and I like the fact that he was imperfect, because he's like me.
yeah,
Exactly.
I'd heard an interview with Gabor Mate and Russell Brand recently, and they were talking about 12 steps in AA, and Gabor Mate was saying about Bill Wilson being a traumatized, he was a traumatized person, and I read his biography. I don't know, was it maybe a couple of years ago now, sort of thing. Yeah, and I was really struck by that. It was very obvious to me that he was abandoned, and by his parents, and the impact that had on him. When he had, brought up by his sort of grandparents who were sort of emotionally distant and stuff like that. Yeah, and you could see how that created a deep insecurity within him. Which led to a lot of, the sort of issues. And Gabor Mate was saying that in AA, but is one of his sort of, if you like, criticisms of AA is that it doesn't really deal with properly with the causes of addiction. It doesn't really bother to go there, other than to say, it's due to self-centeredness or whatever, sort of thing, or the medical model sort of view, that it's biological sort of thing.
Right.
It doesn't really explore outside of that, so. Yeah, I've never had a problem with Bill Wilson that way. I always think, like I say, it's someone I identify with.
Yeah, I was never one that put him on a pedestal or thought anything special of him, really. But because I'm kind of used to, I love history anyway, and all historical figures, when you read about them, they always have they great things that they did, and then their human faults. I mean, that's with everyone. So it was no big deal for me to learn that about Bill W. But something good came out of his life anyway, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I think he did a lot of good stuff, and there were times when he sort of practiced extraordinary humility and things that he turned down and stuff like that, and I'm sure he tried to practice the principles that he preached, but like us all, you don't always do it, do you? You sort of fail, you fall short. I know I've done so. There's times when I get it right, and there's a lot of times when I haven't done so. Recently, I'm thinking about where I've felt sort of come up short quite badly. But that's the ongoing work of recovery, as I see.
So, Steve, tell me this, to kind of change the subject a little bit. How are you faring with COVID? And I don't know what it's like in the United States. It's a mess here. I mean, we haven't gotten anywhere. Is life starting to return to normal where you are? Or
yeah, it is. Particularly in this area. I mean, certainly we're bringing in these local lockdowns now. So some areas, lockdown conditions brought in again, but not around here. Most of the country is like that. Things are starting to get back to normal. I went swimming for the first time in nearly 6 months on Wednesday. That was really good. And, things are starting to open up. I mean, there are a couple of meetings that have opened up around here, you know, sort of in-person meetings, but they're in churches, so they've got to wear masks. You know,
Yeah.
I went to a couple before they brought the mask thing in, and then they brought the masks in, and that's really put me off. And I'm not a fan of that. So I just think it really alienates sort of you in the meeting, I think. So yeah, I'm not keen on that. But yeah, they're there for those, you know, there are, at least there's a couple of meetings locally for those that want to do. But you know, a lot of them there's, you know, online, so people have taken to that. I can't say I have that much really. I've been listening to podcasts, and I do workshops, Zoom workshops, sort of related to recovery, but not actually in AA. You know, I've done, and I did do some Zoom meetings early on, but they just don't work for me. So
You know, it's really interesting. I'm almost the same way. I did some Zoom meetings early on. I don't do a whole lot of them now, but I'm so busy with AA Beyond Belief and this podcast and everything else that all my other interactions with AA people online, that's like my recovery now. That's like, you know, this is like my home group now. And, you know, I don't know if it's going to be that way, you know. It's like maybe my whole AA experience has changed. I don't know if it's going to be permanent or not. If we ever go back we will go one day back to meeting in person again. And I hope that I do that. I mean, there was something special about those in-person meetings, and I don't know, maybe I'm kind of getting used to this life where I don't really see anything beyond my neighborhood anymore. It's just so weird.
I know.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah, the social side of meeting up with people in recovery is really, really important to me. I mean, I live on my own, you know, I've got a close relationship. So it's really important that I get out of my house, you know, my flat sort of thing, and go meet people. But I've done it old school, really. I've just used the phone a lot. I've always used the phone. So I have no problem ringing, you know, friends up in AA and meeting up with them, you know, going walking. I've done quite a lot of that, and going for coffees. I went to the cinema with an AA friend yesterday. So that's how I've done it, really. It's just socialising on a one-to-one, or a couple of us, you know, that sort of thing. And you know, I like that better than meetings, mate. I don't, like I say, I'm getting a bit, I don't know, disillusioned with traditional AA, and I'm trying to look outside of that. And like I say, it's you know, a pity there isn't more secular meetings over here, because I do find them more stimulating. But you know, as Ange was saying, you know, there's a time when you've got to widen, you know, your sort of perspective and your interests and friends, and do it outside of. I have been guilty of narrowing, you know, being too sort of narrow, really, in my interests that way, in my friendship group. You know, that I need to go outside of AA more, and I have started to do that. I have got there's a couple of organisations that I'm interested, that I'm involved with. The people who are not in recovery, but they're like-minded and interested in things I'm interested in, you know. So you know, that's the way to go for me, as well as doing things like this, you know.
I think that's great. You know, that's after I was sober for about 10 years, I kind of branched out from AA and started getting involved with people outside of the program. And I felt like at that time that it was, I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing in sobriety, that I'd spent the previous 10 years getting myself together so that I could go out into the world and actually function in the world. And I did, and I learned a lot during that period of time. If I'd never taken that leap, I would never be where I am today. I really needed to have that experience. Moving beyond that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, it brings in that, you hear the word balance, don't you? You know, in recovery.
Yeah.
I think it does sort of help with that, and you know, it becomes, I don't know, you just become too narrow, really, minded. I think if you don't, you know, sort of move beyond fellowship.
Right, definitely. I've maintained friendships outside of it during my sobriety, so it wasn't. I've never had to make like a big move, you know, from recovery to, you know, people who do not drink alcoholically. They've been there all along. It's still fascinating to me sometimes to watch. Well, when I was going out to places, how some people really can, you know, just have, you know, a few drinks and be fine and not crave anymore. And you know, and we joke that that's alcohol abuse when you just take a couple of sips and throw it away. but I do miss swimming. So I'm envious of that. You did both things that I really want to do, go to a movie and go swimming. And I haven't been able to do either of those this summer because of the pandemic. But yeah, I do. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, are the restrictions still really bad over there?
Oh gosh,
It
yes.
depends on where you're at.
True.
For different states and sometimes different communities. So in our community, there are possibilities for going swimming, but because I stay with my mom and she is immune compromised, I don't go and participate in those right now. So yeah, some of it is self-imposed. But it is still pretty restricted on a lot of that stuff. And in my area in particular, it's still not remotely under control. And so, yeah, so just, trying to stay safe. I'm okay with the Zoom meetings. I like them. I joke that I can't believe I let people breathe on me for so long. But part of it is, it's part of my routine. So it's part of my service work. And when I put something in routine, kind of like when I went to certain meetings, I always went to those meetings, and that kind of created a discipline for me. That's what I have now is, I chair certain meetings, I do this podcast, and I talk to these people and stuff. And so I still have that routine within AA, as well as trying to, maintain friendships outside of AA. It's an interesting time for all of that, though.
I'm amazed that because I think both of you, I know John's in really long-term recovery, but I think you are as well, aren't you, Angela?
I'm a year behind you.
Right. So, but I'm amazed that you've been around so long and you're still so enthusiastic and you do so much. Because I saw a thread that you were responding to the other day, and it sounds like you're full on with, activity, recovery activity. I don't know how you still find time to do anything else.
Yeah, sometimes it can feel like that. But I think it's part of my interest is that it really helps with the insecurities and with my trauma. So I've been able to see the connection to how being helpful to others and sharing, my story and, what I've learned, and just, being a presence of listening to other people and witnessing their story, how much that's helped heal me. And there's still a lot. It's not likely ever going to be completely healed, but there's bits and pieces that I can see a real difference within me. And so, having that, I want to share it with others because I can see in the world, not just within recovery, but so much pain that everyone is in. The disconnect that's not just addiction related. The disconnect, right now with not being able to hang out and go to concerts and do the things that we used to do. Some of the disconnect was there before COVID. We were so isolated, and particularly in the US, of how you run your life. It's very, individual. But I think that people can learn a lot from how AA is structured, and that we can change, AA to make it more secular and accessible to people. So, yeah, I mean, there may be a time that I hit a wall and decide that no, I was wrong. Sorry, everyone. I leave myself open to that possibility. But right now, I see it as exciting and as something that is possible. And so I'm trying to go along that path.
Yeah, it's similar with me. I think what's interesting is what happened with me in my recovery is I've got this underlying urge to be creative. I've got this energy that I need to create something, and so I was able to add the two together: my recovery and this need to be creative. So having this podcast, I love the podcast. I mean, just love everything about it. I love learning about how to do it and everything involved, the technical stuff, the interpersonal communications, everything. I just love it. And that I can combine that passion with my recovery and in the same time help other people. That's what keeps it interesting for me, I think. But I tell you, Steve, I'm a little bit, and you know this too, because you see me sometimes get overwhelmed. But I am in too many things, and I'm wanting to limit a lot of what I do and really just focus more on this podcast, because I've come to the conclusion that this is what I enjoy, and this is where I need to spend my time. You know.
Yeah, and you're really good at it as well. Like I say, and it's one of them. You're doing what you love, and you're helping others. Both of you are helping others in the process. And it's that the truth about recovery, isn't it? Really about that, helping others. In doing so, you get back, you receive back. But yeah, it's also being true to yourself. So you're doing stuff that you're really interested in, not doing stuff that you're not interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Because you found you found your niche.
And I see you doing the same thing. I mean, with your blog and your writing, and you've written for The Fix, you've written for In Recovery magazine, and then now the YouTube. I see that you're getting interested in that too.
Yeah, that's great.
Sorry, I'm going to play around with. It's just exploring really, see if it is for me. But I'm a bit camera shy. I don't really like that side of it. I also don't like the sound of my own voice. I think you two are you sound quite, I don't know, articulate and sophisticated. Americans, and you've got like this sort of northern. I think I'm better at the written word than the spoken word. Then there's that. That's just how. Anyway, I gave the podcast we did a few years ago a listen. Just remind myself of that, and I just don't like myself on that. So I think it's a great podcast. I think the content of it's really good. It was just a really good organic. I'm sure you how you facilitated it was there was planning going in there. I'm glad you did. But I didn't. The actual sound of my voice and the all that. I just thought, no, you're not a good speaker on these things.
I like talking with you. You know what's funny about speaking with you is when I first start talking with you, I have a really hard time understanding your English. If you're actually an English person, I can't understand. But then after I speak with you for a while, I get used to it. I get acclimated to it. I understand every single word you're saying.
I think probably people in this country struggle with my English.
But I understand you perfectly now. But it's like it takes me like a little bit to it takes me about 5 minutes to acclimate to your vernacular or to your accent, I guess.
Yeah. So,
but
and one of the secrets for the podcast, at least for me, and I think John and I have talked about it before, is that we don't listen to ourselves. So I have not heard, other than the story that I shared, which was the very first thing that I sent to John, that I haven't listened to anything that we've done. And that first story, I sent it to him because he had asked for people to send in their secular stories. So I recorded it and sent it to him and listened to it and was horrified and wanted him to take it down. And, and I said, well, again, it's the inner voice in me that says it could be helpful to somebody, so just leave it up. But I hated all of my stammering, all of my stuff like this. I hated the way that I talked. But I have something to offer, and some people seem to get something out of it. So I just keep doing it and ignoring, my own inner critic of how I sound, because there's a way I can avoid that. I don't have to listen to it.
But you sound great, by the way.
Thank you. I have a lot of words and I talk fast.
You've both got a good rapport as well. You get on really well, and you work well together, and you're both thoughtful people. I like you listen to your podcasts; they're really balanced, so you're not.
Thank you.
Thanks.
In your viewpoint, and you're open as well. Both of you are open.
Yeah. A lot of people are surprised that we're not like in the same room, that I'm in Boise, Idaho, and he's in Kansas City, and we've only met, I think, once.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't even really talk to each other that much. Just kind of a hi. Yeah.
I know. When I was in Toronto at that conference, I kept myself busy almost intentionally, so I didn't have to
talk to me.
Yeah. I'm terrible that way. Anyway. So we've come up on an hour. Steve, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It was great to talk with you again. I'd like to do some YouTube stuff with you, so invite me sometime. Maybe I'll go on your YouTube channel. We can chat together on video. Might be kind of fun.
Well, you'll have to help me with the technology side.
I can help with the technology stuff.
Yeah.
But,
well, thanks for inviting me. It's been good to speak to both of you. Like I say, I enjoy listening to you both. So keep it up, you know.
So if I press the right button, yeah, there we go. And that's it. That's another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody. So now we're doing 2 live streams. We're doing one on Friday, and we're doing one on Saturday for those people in that part of the world that might want to listen.
Yeah, the people in this part of the world don't listen.
Well, I would say Europe, but it could be that whole section of the globe. So anyway, so thanks for listening, everybody. And thank you again, Steve. It was great talking with you. And thank you, Angela. It's always great.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.